So I want you to picture something in your mind right now. Just imagine a classic dusty green chalkboard.
Oh, I love a good chalkboard visual.
Right. So on the left side, someone has chalked out Albert Einstein's, most famous equation, E equals mc squared.
The absolute undisputed cornerstone of modern physics, yeah.
Exactly. But now, right next to it, on the right side of the chalkboard, imagine placing an ancient, brittle, thousands of years old biblical scroll, just sitting there side by side.
Which is definitely a jarring image for most people.
It really is. I
Uh,
mean, at first glance, those two things seem to exist in entirely separate universes. One is the absolute peak of 20th century mathematical astrophysics, and the other is, well, ancient theology.
Yeah, and we are definitely trained to compartmentalize them, right? The assumption is usually that one domain deals with the hard, measurable, cold mechanics of reality, and the other deals strictly with, like, philosophy, morality, or faith.
Right, exactly.
Merging them usually feels like trying to mix oil and water. It just doesn't work.
But today, we are looking at a unique set of sources that attempts to do exactly that. The material we are diving into maps the bedrock of modern physics directly onto ancient biblical theology.
Which is a huge undertaking.
It is. And before we go any further, we really need to set the boundaries for this deep dive, especially for you, the listener, who we know loves a thorough, objective analysis.
Yeah, we have to lay the ground rules here.
Right. So the sources provided lean heavily into a pure creation narrative. We are talking about a framework that views creation through a literal six-day lens and explicitly rejects the evolutionary Big Bang timeline.
Yes, that's a crucial distinction.
And as guides for this deep dive, our job isn't to take sides or endorse a specific theological view or tell you what worldview to adopt. Our mission is purely to impartially explore the ideas presented in these texts.
Exactly. We just want to see how this specific framework attempts to bridge the ancient visible world with modern invisible mechanics.
So to understand how they build that bridge, where do we even start?
Well, we have to start by defining the actual landscape. We have to ask a question that seems, honestly, completely elementary but is mathematically terrifying.
Okay, I'm ready. What is it?
What actually is solid matter?
Oh, wow. Yeah, that is a big question.
Right, because for centuries, classical physicists operated on the assumption that the universe was basically a giant clockwork machine. Matter was just a permanent fixture.
Like it was the unchangeable, fundamental building block of reality.
Exactly. And that intuitive sense makes perfect sense. I mean, if I pick up a rock, it feels like a rock.
Yeah, it doesn't feel like a temporary state of something else. It feels solid.
But Einstein completely shattered that clockwork model in 1905. I mean, E equals mc squared changed the entire paradigm of the physical world.
Because that equation dictates that energy, the E, and mass, the m, are not two different things.
Right, they're the exact same thing, just in different states. Matter isn't a permanent, solid bedrock. It is highly condensed, locked-up energy.
So the equation is basically like a translation guide. The c squared in the middle, the speed of light squared, is just the exchange rate between the two states.
Yes, you can think of it as the ultimate cosmic exchange rate. If you convert enough invisible, free-flowing energy, you get visible physical mass.
Wow.
And the theological parallel introduced here relies on Hebrews 11:3. The text states that the universe was formed at God's command, so that what is seen was not made out of what was visible.
What is seen was not made out of what was visible. I mean, that is a wild thing to write down thousands of years before the atom was split.
It really is.
It implies the material world is just a secondary byproduct of an invisible primary source.
And physics confirms that underlying reality. Everything you can touch, everything that registers on a scale is fundamentally composed of invisible, vibrating fields of force.
Okay, I need to push back on this for a second because it just completely defies everyday human experience.
Yeah, go for it.
If I knock on my wooden desk right now, it hurts my knuckles. If physics is telling me I'm not hitting solid, immutable stuff and that I'm just interacting with an invisible energy field, why doesn't my hand just pass right through it?
That is the perfect question. Your hand doesn't pass through the desk because of electromagnetic repulsion.
Okay, unpack that for me.
Well, the atoms in your desk are overwhelmingly empty space. But the electrons orbiting those atoms create an intensely powerful negative charge.
Right.
And the electrons in your hand also have a negative charge.
Mm-hmm.
So when you punch the desk, those two invisible force fields violently repel each other.
Wait, really? So the solid feeling is just the sensation of invisible forces refusing to overlap.
Exactly. The solidity is an illusion created by repelling energy.
That completely reorients how you view the physical world.
It's mind-bending, right?
Absolutely. So if the bedrock of our reality is locked up in visible power, how does that actually play out at the very beginning of the universe? I mean, how does
Oh.
energy transition into a desk or a planet or a star?
Well, the material first walks through the standard scientific consensus of cosmic origins to establish the physics before pivoting to that pure creation lens we talked about.
Right, the mainstream view first.
Historically, science assumed the universe was static and eternal. It had simply always been here. Meanwhile, ancient texts stubbornly claimed a sudden, definitive beginning.
And science eventually caught up to the idea of a sudden beginning in the 20th century, right?
Yes, through a physicist and Catholic priest named Georges Lemaitre, he proposed what became known as the Big Bang Theory. But there is a frequent misunderstanding about this concept.
Oh, I think I know what you're going to say. People usually picture a giant explosion of matter expanding out into pre-existing empty space.
Exactly, which doesn't work.
Because space itself didn't exist yet.
Bingo. The Big Bang is the sudden expansion of space, time, and pure radiation. From absolutely nothing, an unimaginably dense singularity of pure energy appears and begins to stretch outward.
Just raw energy.
Right. And the earliest phase of our universe is often called the radiation era.
Okay, so this is where E equals mc squared starts running in reverse. In those first fractions of a second, there are no planets or stars.
Not at all.
There aren't even atoms. The environment is so intensely hot that matter cannot physically exist. It's just a blinding, dense plasma of pure energy.
Yeah, and as space expands, that immense heat begins to drop. Once the temperature falls past a critical threshold, something incredible happens.
What happens?
High-energy photons, which are just particles of light and pure energy, begin to collide with each other, and the sheer force of those collisions causes them to convert their pure energy directly into physical mass.
So E literally becomes M.
Exactly. Through a process called pair production, the universe begins manufacturing the very first fundamental building blocks of matter, like quarks and electrons.
That is just, it's invisible energy quite literally condensing into the first specks
Yeah.
of physical reality.
It's incredible. And roughly 380,000 years into this process, the universe cooled enough for those erratic particles to finally bond and form neutral hydrogen atoms.
Because before that, it was just a mess of particles.
Right. Prior to that specific moment, the universe was an opaque, glowing fog of scattering electrons. But the instant atoms formed, the fog cleared, the universe became transparent, and that very first primeval light broke free and flooded the expanding cosmos.
And the really incredible part about that is that we can still detect that exact moment of release today.
We can. Because the universe has continued to stretch outward, those ancient waves of light have stretched along with it, dropping into the microwave spectrum.
The cosmic microwave background radiation, or the CMB.
Yes. When astronomers point radio telescopes into the deepest, darkest pockets of empty space, they pick up a uniform, low-level hum of radiation coming from every single direction.
I always think of the CMB as essentially the thermal echo of the universe's fiery birth. It's like, imagine striking a massive cosmic bass drum. Even billions of years later, you can still hear the faint ambient reverberation of that original strike ringing in the air.
That is a brilliant analogy, and the connection drawn in our sources here is striking. In Genesis 1.3, the very first command spoken over the void is, "Let there be light."
Right. The Hebrew word used in the text is or, and it does not refer to the localized light of the sun or the stars, which, don't appear until later in the narrative. It represents primeval, foundational illumination.
So both modern astrophysics and ancient Genesis are suggesting that the entire physical architecture of our universe requires a foundation of light. Light is the absolute prerequisite.
Exactly. But this is where the framework takes a very sharp pivot.
Yeah.
We just mapped out a process that, according to standard cosmology, took hundreds of thousands or even billions of years to unfold.
And the sources ask us to completely remove those billions of years.
We are asked to view this purely through a literal instant creation lens, a crénulo, meaning creation out of nothing, in 6 literal days.
So when you drop the evolutionary cosmic timeline and map E equals mc squared onto a strict, pure creation narrative, the math takes on a profoundly different character. It stops being a formula about deep-time cosmic evolution. It becomes a real-time engineering manual. If an outside force is speaking a physical universe into existence instantly, without using pre-existing materials, well, E equals mc squared. describes divine mechanics.
Okay, let's unpack that.
Look at Psalm 33.6, which states, "The heavens were made by the breath of his mouth." In the physical world, speech requires the exertion of force. It requires power.
Right.
In this theological framework, when God speaks, the voice carries infinite spiritual power, infinite energy, or the E in our equation.
Let's break down the math of that for a second, because the c² part of the equation is what makes this staggering.
Oh, the numbers are just massive.
Yeah, the speed of light is about 300,000 kilometers per second.
Mm-hmm.
Squaring that number gives you 90 billion. That is the multiplier we are dealing with.
It tells us the exchange rate between energy and mass is incredibly steep. To manufacture even a microscopic speck of physical matter, say, the mass of a single paperclip requires a mind-boggling amount of concentrated energy.
Wow.
You would need an atomic bomb's worth of pure energy just to condense out that one little paperclip.
So under this literal model, the command, "Let there be light," on day one, is not just a beautiful poetic metaphor about bringing goodness into the dark. It is a strict mathematical prerequisite.
Precisely. Light is the purest physical manifestation of free energy. By commanding light into existence on the first day, the blank, empty canvas of the universe is flooded with raw power. The energetic substrate is established.
So the raw material has to exist before you can build the house. The energy is deposited first in a literal bank account so it can be drawn upon later.
That's exactly how the sources frame it. When the narrative moves to days 2 and 3 and commands instantly form the oceans, the dry land, and the atmosphere, that foundational energy is being actively condensed.
It is being slowed down and locked into fixed physical mass.
Yes. The spoken word acts as a localized release of infinite power that instantly materializes as heavy matter.
Okay, but this raises a huge question for me. If the universe was built rapidly in this framework, and every physical object is just highly condensed, captured energy, what keeps it all from just flying apart?
The containment problem.
Yeah. If matter wants to be energy, why doesn't my desk spontaneously revert back into a burst of light?
The material points to Colossians 1:17, which states, "In him all things hold together." And the question of how matter holds together is one of the most fascinating aspects of particle physics.
We mentioned earlier that atoms are mostly empty space, but let's dive into the nucleus for a second. If you look inside a single proton, you find even smaller subatomic particles called quarks.
Right, and the logical assumption is that the mass of a proton comes from those physical quarks. But when physicists measure it, the quarks account for barely 1% of the proton's total mass.
Barely 1%.
Barely 1%. The other 99% comes from the invisible binding energy that holds those quarks together.
Wait, I want to make sure I'm fully grasping the mechanics of this. You are saying that 99% of the mass of a physical object isn't actually physical stuff. The mass is generated by the energy holding the stuff together.
To be highly specific, yes. The quarks are bound together by massless particles called gluons. These gluons zip around inside the proton at the speed of light, pulling the quarks toward each other with incomprehensible force.
It's like a microscopic tug of war.
Exactly. That frantic kinetic energy and the sheer strength of that pulling force creates resistance. In physics, resistance to being moved is called inertia, and inertia is what we measure as mass. The holding together is the mass.
That is just, wow. Physical matter is completely dependent on a continuous underlying matrix of invisible power.
It is.
It's like a tightly wound spring. Every rock, every drop of water, every atom in my body is a flexed muscle of invisible energy, just straining against itself to maintain a physical shape.
And the moment that invisible binding energy ceases, the matter itself ceases. The theological implications of that underlying power are addressed head-on in 2 Peter 3.7.
What does that text say?
It describes the end of the current cosmic order. It says the heavens will disappear with a roar and the elements will be destroyed by fire and laid bare.
Now, a casual reading of destroyed by fire kind of conjures up images of a massive bonfire or maybe the surface of a star. But the linguistic choice in the original text is much more specific, isn't it?
It is. The original Greek word used in that verse for destroyed or melt is lio. And lio literally translates to untie, unloose, or dissolve.
Let's just linger on that for a second. An ancient text from the 1st century uses the concept of untying to describe the destruction of the physical elements.
Think about the gluon mechanics we just discussed. If an outside force were to simply untie those subatomic bonds, if the invisible tension holding the quarks together was unloosed, E equals mc squared dictates that all of that locked-up kinetic energy would be released instantly.
That is a flawless description of a nuclear reaction. I mean, nuclear fission is literally the untying of the atom.
The solid elements wouldn't just burn, they would dissolve back into the raw, blinding light from which they were initially spoken into existence. It is genuinely terrifying to realize that this ancient Greek vocabulary aligns so perfectly with the mechanics of thermonuclear dissolution.
The idea that an ancient author captured the reality of nuclear physics using the vocabulary of a fisherman or a tent maker is stunning.
It really makes you pause.
But the synthesis of physics and ancient texts in this material goes beyond just the mechanics of mass and energy. It also explores how these texts describe complex physical laws on a macro scale.
Yes, the material highlights several phenomena, like the expansion of space in Isaiah and Job, or the hydrological cycle in Ecclesiastes. But the most profound example is how these texts grapple with the concept of entropy.
Entropy, right. The second law of thermodynamics. For anyone who needs a quick refresher, the second law states that in a closed system, everything moves from order to disorder. Usable energy is constantly being lost or dissipated as heat.
It provides the universe with an arrow of time. Things decay, iron rusts, stars burn out, and heat disperses into the cold void. You can't unscramble an egg, right?
Exactly. The physical universe is steadily marching toward a state of maximum disorder.
But why is it so remarkable to find that in an ancient text? I mean, wouldn't an ancient farmer watching his crops rot or his tools rust intuitively understand that things break down?
That's a good point. They understood localized decay, certainly.
But the prevailing cosmological view in many ancient cultures was cyclical. They believed the universe itself was eternal. Time was a wheel. Seasons cycled, ages cycled, and the universe perpetually refreshed itself.
Okay, I see.
The idea of a linear universe with a definitive beginning, slowly burning through a finite amount of fuel until it suffered a heat death, was not the standard philosophical assumption.
But the biblical texts explicitly reject the cyclical model. Psalm 102 and Hebrews 1 both state that the foundations of the earth and the heavens will, and I quote, all wear out like a garment.
That specific metaphor, wearing out like a garment, is a brilliant articulation of the second law of thermodynamics.
Because a garment doesn't usually explode, right?
Right. Exactly. It frays. The threads lose their structural integrity over a long period of time. The usable energy of the fabric slowly degrades. The authors are applying the concept of directional decay not just to localized objects, but to the entire fabric of the cosmos.
The texts insist the universe is actively fraying. It is losing usable energy, exactly as modern thermodynamics dictates.
It really challenges the assumption that ancient theology and modern physics are inherently adversarial.
Yeah, it does. When you place them side by side, the vocabulary differs. Yeah, one utilizes mathematics, the other utilizes poetry and analogy,
Yeah.
but they are frequently attempting to describe the exact same underlying reality.
The material forces you to reconsider the observational depth of these ancient writers. How do we contextualize these ancient authors describing entropy and orbital mechanics thousands of years ago?
It's a fantastic question.
Whether you view these texts as a literal mechanical blueprint of a six-day creation, or whether you read them as deeply inspired poetic harmonies, it is impossible to ignore how elegantly they map onto our modern understanding of the physical world.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? We've covered incredible ground today in this deep dive.
We really have.
We started by looking at E equals mc squared, transforming it from just a rote high school physics equation into a potential bridge. We explored the boundary line between the visible world we interact with and the invisible power that actually sustains it.
And we examined the thermal echo of the early universe in the cosmic microwave background, illustrating how foundational light is to the existence of matter.
We evaluated the pure creation reframe, where the massive exchange rate of the speed of light squared requires an infinite power source. It turns the concept of divine speech into raw, mass-producing energy.
Which is such a powerful image.
Yeah. And we explore the invisible binding energy, the gluons that create mass through sheer force. And we look at the terrifying reality of a universe held together by tension, capable of untying and dissolving back into blinding light.
It requires you to completely reorient your perspective on the mundane physical world.
We hope synthesizing these perspectives provided a new way to think about the nature of the ground you are walking on. The physical world is not just a collection of dead, static dirt and rock. It is immensely dynamic.
And I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over long after you finish listening.
Okay, let's hear it.
If the fundamental building block of our physical reality is just captive energy, if everything around us is fundamentally invisible power that has been instantly slowed down and locked into form, How does that alter the way you interact with seemingly ordinary objects today?
That is profound. Next time you reach down and pick up a common stone or just hold a glass of water in your hand, just stop and remember you are holding a miracle of locked up light.
A miracle of light.
We're going to leave it right there for today. Keep asking the big questions and most importantly, keep digging into your sources. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.